Welcome to today's Remembrance Day Service. As I mentioned during assembly, on Wednesday, I was fortunate to be able to attend the Cobble Hill Remembrance Day ceremony. Along with thousands of others, we were guided through the service by our very special guest this morning. It was an occasion that brought many, including me, to tears. Our guest was a member of the Royal Canadian Navy, for 35 years. He worked on submarines for 10 of those years. He retired with the rank of Chief Petty Officer. He is currently the chairman of the BC Yukon chapter of the Royal Canadian Legion. You may have run across Mr. Dwight Grieve when you're on campus. He's also one of our security guards. If there's ever any trouble, particularly with outsiders on our campus, the security guards are told to call Mr. Felix for backup. Dwight never has to. So it goes with someone who has served his country for 35 years. For the past few years, I've read a poem written by one Brentonian for another. Mr. Colin Lytton Graham's poem immortalizes his first 15 rugby teammate and his best friend, Mr. Ian Gillespie. They were both from the class of 1941. You'll see the engraved version of this poem just outside of Rogers House on the way to the rugby pitch. This morning, rather than me, I invite Mr. Grieve to read this poem, named A Distant Time.
Good morning, all. Colin Lytton Graham immortalized his friend Ian Gillespie, both from the class of 1941 with this poem, A Distant Time. In the changing room, after the Navy game, he said, "Indian, I've joined the Air Force." Through the steam from the showers, he was already a ghost. "Live forever, pussycat," I said. "I promise you, you'll live forever. We're all immortal when we go to war. You were posted missing in action. The next I knew, your Beaufort fighter went down on bomber escort over the channel. At Runnymede, I saw your name 20 years later. It seemed a terrible waste of the best fullback the world had ever seen. Thy citation said, you died drawing enemy fire. What else? You'd call for the mark, solid as houses. You tackled like a rattlesnake. You didn't leave the kitchen when the fire got hot. I promised you you'd live forever. Well, almost. While I live, so do you. As long as someone can still remember you, you are still here with us. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Grieve. You've honored us this morning with your presence. Yesterday's attack in Paris highlight once again the need for a generation of peace, a generation of leaders, a generation of inclusion, a generation of enlightenment, and a generation of love. Our belief is that you are that generation. The torch is being passed to you to hold high. Di Manu in Manu. Please stand for the singing of the Canadian National Anthem.
from the outset, I want to say that it's a great honour to be asked to speak to you today. I certainly don't take this honour lightly, as I'm a guest in your country and school. We actually have 2 days back home where we stop and reflect on the devastation of war. One is Anzac Day on the 25th of April, and the other is Remembrance Day. Both are treated with great reverence. Australians participated in conflicts around the globe over the last 100 years has had a profound effect on shaping our identity as a nation, an identity which we're extremely proud of. I feel very fortunate that the devastation of war has not touched me personally. However, I stand here and I'm proudly to tell you that my great-grandfather fought on the Western Front in the First World War, and my grandfather fought the Japanese in the Second. I am, like most Australians and Canadians, proud of our country's involvement in global conflicts so far from home. There is nothing glorious about war. There is nothing good about what these men and women had to do. But still, there's such a ferocity to the feeling of national pride, respect, reverence with which these heroes are remembered. I think of these characters, these men and women displayed, their bravery, courage, sacrifice, mateship and determination. In Australia, storytelling is an important part of the process of remembrance. Tales are shared from one generation to the next, which has shaped our perception of what it was and what it is to be an Australian soldier. Australian soldiers are affectionately called Anzacs or diggers. The slang term digger relates to the trench digging duties during the World Wars, and the Anzac is an abbreviation for the Joint Australian-New Zealand Army Corps that formed part of the forces that landed at Gallipoli in 1915. War provided the fledgling nation of Australia the opportunity to define itself as different and unique from the British Empire. In each of the wars, the Australian forces have been categorised by others through their actions. They have become known as some of the fierce and most courageous soldiers in the world. However, there's a catch. The Australian soldiers also had been known as the least disciplined, the least respectful of authority, and the most mischievous soldiers the Allies have ever known. An example is, at the Sphinx in Egypt, it actually lost its nose because an Australian soldier, during rifle practice, shot it off. The Australian soldier, the typical digger, was known to be a heavy drinker, brawler, womaniser, who managed to fight a war in his spare time. Anzac Day and Remembrance Day ensures that these heroic and mischievous deeds of Australian soldiers are recounted, and that their sacrifices are remembered by both young and old. This is a responsibility that Australians certainly take seriously. Last year, over 120,000 people attended the official dawn service at Melbourne's War Memorial, the Shrine of Remembrance. And each year, millions attend similar dawn services in communities both big and small across the country. I'd like to give you a little insight into Australia's most famous campaign. Most Australian historians agree that the 8-month Gallipoli campaign during World War I played a crucial role in the formation of Australia's identity, a country formed through the federation of 6 British colonies just 15 years earlier. Interestingly, this defining event was actually one of complete devastation, disaster and ultimate loss. The Anzacs landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula as part of a combined English, French and Indian Army forces. The plan conceived by Winston Churchill was to capture the Gallipoli Peninsula in order to control a narrow strait of water known as the Dardanelles. Winning the Dardanelles would allow the Allied navies to control an important 67-kilometre stretch of coastline and give naval access to the British allies, Russia. On the 25th of April 1915, the Anzac soldiers were landed at the wrong location. They stormed the beach of Gallipoli Peninsula to be met by a waiting Turkish army perfectly positioned at the top of impossibly high cliffs. The wrong location meant the task the Anzacs were sent for the next was impossible. Gains were measured by metres, and soldiers sent up out of the trenches to try and advance were being sentenced to almost certain death. Australia lost 12,000 young men on that tiny piece of land by the time the British decided it was time to leave. And the Anzacs left Gallipoli 8 months later with nothing but to show than a death toll. However, it's stories of mateship, courage that form the fabric of our remembrance. And I'd like to share just 2 with you. One story that every child in Australia is taught is about a bloke called Simpson and his donkey. Private John Simpson This legend was born not out of taking arms or storming the trenches or slaying the enemies, as you'd probably expect. He's remembered for his remarkable bravery and sacrifice in saving his wounded mates in extremely trying conditions. Day after day, he went to the front with his donkey and picked up wounded soldiers. Even when he was told by his superior to stop, he still went because he just could not stand leaving his wounded mates on the battlefield dying. He was killed barely a month after they arrived on the peninsula, but his legend lives on in Australia. From the Second World War, we're told about a group of Australian soldiers who fought in Libya, and they earned themselves the formidable reputation for being unbeaten, despite the perceived unwinnable circumstances. They are remembered in Australia as the Rats of Tobruk. The Australian soldiers gave themselves this nickname after Radio Berlin described the situation of the 9th Division of the Australian Infantry found themselves in as caught like rats in a trap. For 8 long months, surrounded by German and Italian forces, these men of the 9th Division in Tobruk withstand tank attacks, artillery barrage, daily bombing. They endured desert searing heat, bitterly cold nights, as well as hellish dust storms and dwindling provisions. They lived in dugouts, caves and crevasses. The enemy could not believe that the defence of Tobruk would not surrender or they would not retreat. Their determination and bravery, combined with the aggressive tactics of their commanders, became a source of inspiration to the Allied forces and a source of immense frustration to the enemy. So fierce their reputation did the Rats of Tobruk develop that on one particular occasion, a captured German officer who'd been told the feared Australian soldiers had actually left Tobruk accused his captors of being British soldiers who dressed up as Australians to scare the enemy into retreating. Australians really love that story. The Rats of Tobruk became legends in Australia for never giving up, for continuing to fight when all others have surrendered, and for when winning was meant to be impossible. Now, these are just 2 small stories of courage, mateship and fighting spirit that define Australian war efforts over the last 100 years. When I was at school, just like you, I embraced Remembrance Day and the stories of remarkable acts of people that were older than me and things that happened to them a long time ago. When I was in my 20s, I saw war differently. I then compared myself to the men and women in the stories. During this time, I was fortunate to travel around the world for 18 months. To do what most young Australians do, I did the typical thing and I went to Gallipoli. Visiting the battlefields of Gallipoli is like basically a Canadian visiting Vimy Ridge. The night before I visited the actual sites of Gallipoli, I stayed in a youth hostel filled with New Zealanders and Australians. We're all in Turkey for the same reason, and we're all fired up for the next day. We sat around recounting stories and watching a famous Australian movie called Gallipoli. The next morning we headed to the beach, seriously fired up. When I arrived at the beach, I looked up at the cliffs. The Anzacs had to scale. A sick feeling swept over me. All I could think of was at that same age, as many of those soldiers would have been, would I have had the courage to jump out of that boat and run towards those cliffs while the guns were firing at me? I always knew these men were brave, but until I saw what they faced that day on the 25th of April 1915, I never just realised how brave they were. I walked around the Gallipoli Peninsula and could clearly see some of the trenches the soldiers had occupied nearly 100 years earlier. And in some cases, the Allied and Turkey trenches were only metres apart. Could I have coped with the fact that I was only 2 metres away from someone that wanted to shoot me dead? Would I have been able to climb out of that trench when ordered and run to my certain death? I don't think I would, and this was a very sobering feeling indeed. This leads me to today. And I know my feelings of Remembrance Day is different than when I was 15, when I was a 15-year-old schoolboy and a 25-year-old backpacking around the world. And that brings me to the photo behind me. This photo is from my school I teach back home. And every year on Remembrance Day, a student places a cross in the grass next to the school's war memorial. Each cross represents a past student that gave his life for us. Behind the school's war memorial is an oak tree with an acorn seed brought home from the battlefields of Gallipoli by a digger 100 years ago. As a 40-year-old, I've taught thousands of students in my 18 years of teaching. Remembrance Day and these crosses serve to remind me of the fallen soldiers that were once someone's students, just like you. I see these crosses, and I see you, my students, and I just hope and pray that we never add another cross. We should be so proud that our forefathers and mothers gave themselves so generously and bravely to the people so far away. So for such a foreign and such unknown, and for a cause so removed from their own. On this day each year, as you move through life, and I invite you to celebrate the opportunities and to remember with respect and reverence the great characteristics of human strength, generosity, sacrifice, bravery shown by ordinary Australians and Canadians, and men and women, for the freedom and quality of life that we enjoy today.
This day and age we're living in gives cause for apprehension, with speed and new invention and things like third dimension. Yet we get a trifle weary with Mr. Einstein's theory, so we must get down to earth, at times relax, relieve the tension. No matter what the progress or what may yet be proved, the simple facts of life are such that cannot be removed. You must remember this: a kiss is still a kiss, a sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by. And when two lovers woo, they still say, I love you. On that you can rely. No matter what the future brings as time goes by. Moonlight and love songs, never out of date.
During the March break of my grade 8 year, I had the opportunity to travel across the world and experience some of the most significant and bloodiest battlefields from the First and Second World Wars. This trip was a once-in-a-lifetime experience that would open my eyes to not only the world itself, but the realities and consequences of war. From the Churchill bunkers in London, the trenches and craters of the Somme, and the historic beaches of Normandy, this trip made me realize that even with the bloodshed and cruelness that war brings to the eyes of the world, one theme remained common everywhere we visited: peace. Our trip began in London, England, where we toured many of the typical attractions one would see on a trip to England. We toured the streets of London, Big Ben, Westminster Abbey, and a ride on the London Eye, which offered spectacular views of the city. Our time there was short, and within 2 days we'd cross the English Channel, where we'd spend the remainder of our trip in France, Belgium, Holland, and eventually Germany. As we entered Belgium, we would begin to visit the first of our battlefields, war museums, and eventually cemeteries. As you walk through the gates of any Canadian World War cemetery, 6 words greet you at the entrance. Engraved into a thick piece of Portland stone is the phrase, "Let their name liveth forevermore." This phrase helps solidify the impact, legacy, and sacrifices these soldiers left behind. As one continues on into the cemetery, you begin to truly witness the magnitude of the losses that the war brought to our nation. The Battle of Passchendaele is one of the most significant battles in Canadian military history and has one of the most beautiful Canadian cemeteries from the First World War. The rows upon rows of white tombstones, perfectly lined one after another, begins to put the sacrifices these young men made into perspective. The Battle of Passchendaele was costly for Canada and the Commonwealth, as we suffered 15,000 casualties. As I began to walk through each row and read the names, regiment, and age of the fallen soldiers, every so often I would come across a tombstone without any information engraved in it. All that could be read was a soldier of war, known unto God. These graves are dedicated to those soldiers who could not be found or identified. And of the 15,000 plus soldiers who lost their lives at Passchendaele, only 7,000 graves are marked with the names of the fallen. The Passchendaele Cemetery was an incredible experience. From the time I entered the gates until I went to bed that night, a sense of peace and Canadian pride filled my body. I would not soon forget. Our trip continued on through Belgium, and we stopped and visited sites along the way, which included the town of Ypres, the Somme, and even a tour of the canals in Brussels. Nothing yet had seemed to compare to the Passchendaele Cemetery, but as we entered France, that would soon change. I walked slowly through the rough sand, trying to prevent anything from entering my shoe. I began to realize the importance of where I was standing. A beach with rich gold sand, scattered hulls of metal, and one that stretched for as far as the eye can see. It wasn't just a beach, it was 5. And I was standing on one of the most famous and bloodiest beaches in United States military history, Omaha. On June 6, 1942, the Allied powers launched the biggest amphibious assault into Nazi-occupied France. As I stood there, I tried to imagine myself, storming the beach, desperately finding a way to stay out of the aim of the machine gunners in the bunkers at the top of the beach. As much as I tried to image myself there, I couldn't. The courage and bravery these men showed is incomparable. The cemetery, dedicated to the fallen soldiers of Omaha Beach, is breathtaking. The crosses of each shoulder is truly remarkable. Omaha suffered the highest casualty rate of any of the 5 beaches. The cemetery contains the burial site of 9,300 American soldiers. Walking through the rows of the fallen soldiers, I began to realize how great their sacrifice truly was. Today, we live in one of the best countries in the world. We live in peace, we have freedom, and we have the opportunity to achieve our goals. The efforts made by both men and women through the Great Wars have shaped our country into what it is today. Although the battlefields I visited were once a place of complete chaos, horror, and death, they now represent something different. Each battlefield is now a beacon of peace. They are the fields, trenches, and oceans where our soldiers fought for our freedom. As we take this day to commemorate our fallen heroes, we also celebrate the peace that has been brought to our lives by the courageous acts of these soldiers. The impact they have made on our lives today is tremendous. Their actions, bravery, and names will live forevermore.
Many of the dead were not much older than most of us. Their future was as exciting for them as our plans are. Yet, they had to leave the classroom and the playing field, the art studio and the boathouse, to die in muddy wastelands and on desolate mountainsides, in icy oceans and on blood-stained beaches.
Pause to think about how great a sacrifice this would be for all of us today. We are asked to commit ourselves to excellence in academics, sports, and the arts. They were asked to commit their lives. Some who died came from Brentwood. In the old Brentwood chapel, built by past generation of Brentonians, etched in oak on the memorial are the names of the Brentwood fallen.
Let us pay homage to the courage of those Brentonians who sacrificed their lives for their country. Please stand for the reading of the Roll of Honor, the last post, and the silence.
Alec Balache, Daka Barrett Leonard, Norman Beard.
John Bishop, John Bryden, John Campbell.
Arthur Kotler, Alan Dunlop, Robert Field.
Ian Gillespie, John Gillespie, Bruce Hanbury.
Barnett Harvey, Sholto Marland, Alan Mayhew.
Ken Osler, Richard Proctor, Robert Proctor.
Leigh Salter, Ralph Smythe, John Stubbs.
Donald Stewart, Glenn Svensson, Michael Simmons.
Thornton White, Lawrence Wilkinson, Ted Williams.
From glen to glen and down the mountainside, the summer's gone and all the roses falling. 'Tis you must go and I must bide. And when ye come and all the flowers are dying, and I am dead, as dead I well may be, you'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say an Ave there for me. And when ye come and all the flowers are dying, and I am dead, as dead I well may be, you'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say an Ave there for me, and I shall hear the soft you tread above me, and oh, my grave shall warmer, sweeter be, for ye will bend and tell me that you love me, and I shall sleep in peace until you come to me. Oh, Danny boy, oh, Danny boy, I love you so.
Remembrance Day is not a glorification of war. It is a call for peace. An awful price in human lives was paid by the youth of past generations to achieve peace. By the act of remembering today, we ensure that their sacrifices are not forgotten. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Remembrance Day is also the time for each one of us to think about what we are contributing to the future. Remembrance Day calls out that there should be no more names chiseled on gravestones of war anywhere in the world. The torch is being passed on de manuum manuum, from hand to hand, to you, the next generation. Let us all take a few minutes to look into our hearts and dream the dream of peace.